You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. Washington's youth prisons are facing a crisis of overcrowding. The state's two medium and maximum security youth prisons, Green Hill School in Chehalis and Echo Glen Children's Center in Snoqualmie, have both consistently met or surpassed their maximum capacity for residents in recent years. When the 2025 Washington legislative session began, lawmakers had lots of potential solutions, from custody transfers to increased diversion programs to early release petitions. Lawmakers brought a bevy of bills attempting to fix overcrowding at youth detention centers. But now, with the session at an end, some of those key bills have not passed. So what happened, and where does it leave Washington's youth detention crisis? Washington State Standard reporter Jake Goldstein-Street covered this story, and he joins me now. Jake, it's always good to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned that these detention centers are overcrowded. What does that look like? I mean, how bad is the problem?
Yeah, you're seeing this issue specifically at Green Hill the most. This is a facility, like you said, in Chehalis with what they call a safe operational capacity of 180 young people. It houses boys and men ages 17 to 25. But for over a year, it's been dozens above that in the 230, 240 range regularly. At the end of April, we were at 230. And what that means is that they really don't have the staff to handle caring for that many people. This is the whole reason that you have more younger people spending time in these juvenile detention centers is so that they can get rehabilitation. They call this program Juvenile Rehabilitation, JR. In 2018, passed a new law to offer JR to young offenders up to the age of 25 versus they used to have to, when they turned 21, transfer to adult prison through the Department of Corrections. The idea was that this was a more rehabilitative atmosphere than a prison was. But what we've seen is as the capacity has been strained, you have young people spending 22 hours in their cells. These cells don't have toilets or sinks. You have more and more fights breaking out as there's more tension. You have staff smuggling in contraband that they've been arrested for, including drugs. You've got literal footballs being thrown over the fence of this facility filled with drugs. It's just, as one lawmaker told me back in January, it's a powder keg with the fuse already lit.
There were a number of proposals brought by lawmakers to address this issue during this year's legislative session. You reported on them, Jake. What stood out to you as the most promising and maybe the most disappointing that they did not pass?
Yeah, there were basically two twin measures that lawmakers were looking to pass. One brought by Republicans, including Senator John Braun. He's the Senate Minority Leader who represents Green Hill as in his district. He brought a bill really focused on the capacity issue, giving mechanisms for the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, who runs these detention centers, to transfer people when they're above capacity, transfer young men to adult prison or to community facilities that are more minimum security. And then another bill brought by Democrats that was very partisan, didn't have any Republican support, that would basically, and it's pretty complicated and it does a lot of different things, but on its face, it forces judges to find that young people that are being convicted have to spend time in juvenile detention, that they couldn't be served in a community facility or something lower level, that they necessitate that, and that a lower level facility is inadequate. And then also tries to expand the ways that young people can get into different alternatives to custody. And so that was a pretty sweeping bill, trying to do a lot of different things, very complicated in its first year. And so neither of those made it all the way through the legislature, died pretty close to the 11th hour, maybe around 10:30 hour. You had the Republican bill that was trying to transfer more young people, passed out of the Senate, bipartisan, unanimous vote. The Democratic measure dealing with trying to get people so they don't end up in these detention centers in the first place, passed out of the Senate with no Republican support, lost a couple Democratic votes, very close vote, and then made it all the way to the House floor, just about. And then neither made it out because there was consternation among Democrats about their own measure among some moderates that felt that it was being basically either too lenient or trying to set up another system where you're expanding these alternatives that people could go to, but we're not actually creating more community supports to create the capacity that could take them. And so basically the system was not set up for such a big change is what they would argue.
Getting out of over their skis, basically, with the diversion programs not being ready to take this bigger influx of population. Is that what the argument basically was, that even for reformers, they felt like these programs were not ready for a big influx?
Yeah, and these are not, your law and order types arguing this. These are people that want to minimize the amount of people that end up in juvenile detention. It's just the system was not set up for that, and so you'd be creating more issues down the line.
So it sounded like Senator Braun, who was pushing the bill that would have made it easier to transfer young people to the Department of Corrections facilities, he really blamed Senator Wilson's bill, the diversion bill, for his bill not making it through. I mean, why were these paired together? Why did they both fall together?
Yeah, that was Senator Wilson's idea. Senator Claire Wilson, a Democrat from Federal Way, who's really a lead on these issues. She chairs the Human Services Committee in the Senate. She wanted these two bills to run together basically because you have Senator Braun's bill trying to just kind of create a relief valve, but not actually work, she would argue, dealing with the issue of making sure that these young people are getting rehabilitation. And she wanted another bill that kind of opened up more opportunities because obviously there's a lot of research out there that incarceration is not good for people, especially young people. Part of the reason we are in this situation was that law that was in response to kind of developing brain science showing that the effects that incarceration can have on people under the age of 25. And so she wanted these two bills together, not just, giving an opportunity to send people to prison for adults, but also to make sure that they don't end up there in the first place. And so trying to tackle this issue of capacity on both ends, both giving a more immediate relief valve through the Braun bill, and then also trying to cut off as many people going into the system in the first place in Senator Wilson's bill.
You're expecting that these proposals are going to be back next year, right, Jake?
Yes, that would be the plan. They came into the session with bipartisan momentum to deal with this issue. They had these two proposals that got really close and weren't able to make it. People are incredibly frustrated. There's very little going on right now that is going to change the capacity issues. We're going to be back here next year having the same conversation. And so they'll be looking to pass these again.
There are some changes on the horizon, though, for youth detention, right, Jake? I mean, there is a potential bit of relief coming from a new facility, right?
Yes. So the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, DCYF, the state agency that handles juvenile detention, is planning to open in just a few weeks in early June a new 48-bed facility, so much smaller than the existing ones. And this would be very tailored to medium security people held at Green Hill to transfer there for, I believe it's a 6-month rotation. And this would be sitting on the grounds of the Stafford Creek Correction Center in Aberdeen and Grays Harbor County, basically a retrofitted prison unit, which has drawn criticism and I think people are kind of coming around on, but it would be run by juvenile rehabilitation staff, not by prison staff. And the people held there would not have any communication or interaction with the adults held at the prison. And this is basically kind of a mentorship leadership program for people to get really directed therapy and other things so that they can go back to Green Hill after a rotation there and kind of become mentors to the young people there. And so that will provide a bit of a relief valve. If you were talking about there's 230 people right now, that would get them close to the 180 capacity if you had 48 people there at a time. They're kind of opening this facility in waves. This first round next month will be maybe 8-10 people going there, and then finally fully getting to full capacity by the fall is the hope.
Jake Goldstein-Street is a reporter with the Washington State Standard. keeping a close eye on happenings in Olympia, and we appreciate your reporting so much, Jake. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman, and we're still waiting to see if Governor Ferguson will sign off on the legislature's budget proposal, which includes $25 million for that new 48-bed detention center, as well as $6 million in grant funding for county diversion programs and scouting for another potential medium-security juvenile prison location. In the meantime, we wanted to know how the overcrowding situation is impacting youths housed in Washington's detention centers. Dr. Eric Trupin is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington Medical School. He's a child psychologist who has worked with incarcerated youth for decades. And I sat down with him to discuss, especially in light of overcrowding, what's the impact of being imprisoned on a youth's psyche?
It exacerbates every sort of conflictual behavior a youth would have. So if they're in a crowded setting, there is very little activity, be it school, be it vocational training, be it therapy, be it interactions with other people, being able to get out of one's cell. You're creating an environment that is explosive. Often youth, they describe it. I'm irritable. I'm annoyed. I wake up in the morning and, I look at the day and there's nothing going to happen. Maybe I'll be outside my cell for a little while, but I don't know that. The staff is unnerved. They're irritable, their reaction around all of this. So you're creating this hostile, toxic environment that clearly in Washington State here, it has led to increase in fights, increase in youth on youth violence, increase on staff engaging in behaviors that are engaging in acts that are illegal. So, it is so unacceptable from a humane perspective. And then again, if our idea is what we're doing is rehabilitating young people, that's what it's called, juvenile rehabilitation. That's not what it's doing. Doing the exact opposite.
Let me ask you about the legislative attempts to fix the overcrowding issue that we saw this session. A couple big ones that failed. We've just talked to reporter Jake Goldstein-Street about them. Senator Braun's bill, Senator Wilson's bill. Now, my understanding is that you were an advocate for Senator Wilson's bill, which would have helped keep more young people outside of detention. These two bills failed. What do you think needs to be done at the legislative level to help solve overcrowding in youth prisons?
Well, I think Senator Wilson's bill that began, and I was involved in some of the development of that, but great deal of input from Katie Hurley, who's at the King County Public Defenders, and other advocates around this issue. Could we do better than detaining youth for long periods of time by diverting them to programs in the community? And there were concerns on the part of prosecutors towards legislators around whether this diversion would have an impact on community safety. Again, all of the research shows that we do better when we don't detain youth. Yes, there are some youth who need to be detained. I'm not minimizing that that's the case, but the vast majority of youth will in fact do better if they're not detained. Very strong research being done on that issue. I think the prosecutors, if I understood it correctly, leaned on legislators about their concerns about community safety. I think on the other side, there were some legislators who viewed Senator Braun's bill not in a positive light. So you had, coming from both the left and the right, some concerns around that. And so unfortunate, because it was strategically a terrific idea. Let's give judges the opportunity to make some decisions about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate in terms of managing a youth who has committed a crime. and very well thought through. I think the concern, and it certainly was my concern as well, is have we coordinated services in the community effectively enough to be able to make judges comfortable with doing this type of diversion? That I think was a concern, and a concern by some of the legislators. And I think in the discussions I've heard subsequent, there's going to be a lot of work being done between now and the next session around developing a more collaborative approach between the juvenile justice system and our healthcare authority. And, just because there's not the degree of coordination amongst the systems, thinking this through in a collaborative way. Some other states have done this more effectively than we have. We did JR to 25, a big deal nationally, but we didn't really think through, okay, how for some youth, if in fact we're going to divert them, if in fact they're going to return to the community, what are the services, what are the evidence-based practices that are really going to make the community safer and improve outcomes for kids? And I think that undermined the willingness of some legislators to support this.
So it sounds like you're saying that in order for the diversion programs to continue to be expanded, in order for community safety to be prioritized at the same time as youth rehabilitation, that these programs need to be beefed up, that there has to be
Absolutely.
more attention on them. What would that look like?
There are a host of evidence-based programs. They often fall under the term of multisystemic. There are a host of programs with individuals with lived experience, often credible messengers, who demonstrated that these types of interventions, highly supervised, bring about good outcome. So I think, and again, I think we don't collaborate across our different systems.
So let me ask you about the context in which this conversation is happening, which is we saw this spike starting in 2023 of crime among juveniles, committed by juveniles. Some of that was driven by car theft, and that has come down. We don't have enough evidence for this year to see how crime is trending, juvenile crime is trending. But what do you think was behind that bump? And what's going on with young people? Some people blamed the diversion programs that they said were not being effectively applied here, and saying that we were being too willing to have at-home detention instead of, having people behind bars.
Violent crimes, despite the significant decrease over the course of time, have gone up nationally 10%. You can't just say, oh, we decided here in Washington State that all these diversion programs have led to youth engaging in violence. That's a specious. I think that there's not good evidence around that. In fact, the evidence is many of these programs has really have had positive impact on many young people who never would have engaged. It's hard to say how come. I make the analogy in mental health. At Children's Hospital, our ERs over the course of the past number of years have significant increase with young people struggling with serious emotional problems around self-harm, around suicide, around distress, around anxiety. Significant increases in young people. So how much of this just relates to the general sort of, there's a sense of discomfort or in our world, and how much of it is social media and how much of it is, but I think there are a lot of contributing factors, and saying it's because of diversion, it's not a factual thing.
This issue of how many and whether to incarcerate youth at all has been a big topic of discussion over the last 5-10 years in King County. When the Judge Patricia H. Clark Children and Family Justice Center was being built, then King County Executive Dow Constantine made a promise that King County would phase out youth detention by 2028. Now, that promise was shot down last year by the King County Council, which voted to keep the facility open. You've said already in our conversation that there will be some youth, unfortunately, who do have to be in detention. Is that your feeling? I mean, that aiming for zero youth detention is unrealistic? Or what do you think about that goal?
I was quite involved in a variety of ways during that phase. I was actually overseeing the mental health programs at King County Detention, and also involved with Executive Constantine around that, the development of that. I think it was a mistake to say zero youth. I think it was a mistake. It affected the morale of the staff at King County Detention. Although I will go back and forth with my colleague Ben Danielson, who certainly believes, and I agree with him, that we dramatically could reduce the number of youth. I'm not sure we'll ever get to zero, but certainly we can go in a different direction than incarcerating many young people and bring about better outcomes.
So a much expanded diversion program that is strengthened, that is based on evidence, but maybe not the zero youth detention, at least in our world today. Dr. Eric Trupin, professor of psychiatry and behavioral science at the University of Washington's Medical School, child psychologist that has worked for decades with incarcerated youth. I really appreciate you being part of this conversation. Thank you for giving us this context, especially in light of what's been going on in the legislature and what is going to come back next year in the 60-day session. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.